Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast. I'm your host, John, and today we're going to be continuing our conversation with Matthew and Johannes, and we're talking about being a plot terrier, getting players to assist you during a game, and also what we're looking for in a rules system at this point in our lives. So we'll get straight to that after the music. To quickly jump to your earlier point, you're saying about being a bit of a plot terrier. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, I'm a bit I'm a bit like that myself. I mean, to be honest, I can remember in Johannes' recent session where we discovered there was the existence of effectively like a zombie planet, and like what obviously we're playing online and like watching on the screen. There's a bit where me and you were like, we're going to the zombie planet.
We're going to the zombie planet, and to mention Johannes' game as well. I like what Johannes did with the game. I like that he went, okay, I'm not going to invalidate anything that happened previously. Like, all that is canon. That happened, right? But we're now just going to focus what's going on over here. And then that stuff's going to go over there. And then we're going to explore over there. So it was a continuation. But there was like, we're now over here and this stuff's new. But this stuff over here is still happening. Stuff from this over here can still affect, maybe, possibly, in the future, what's happening here. But we don't know yet. And that's part of the fun, is like, is the the new Columbine going to turn up? They could. We just don't know it yet.
Yeah, and that was, like, the concept was made in, like, a Session 0 type deal. That's what we formally necessarily call it that, or I don't, but like it's the talk that we have before we set up a new game. And originally, because all I knew was I wanted to do more Starts with a Number. I was feeling it, and before we had that talk about what the game would be and what everyone was interested in, I was prepping in my head for another round of the same sector that we played the first one in. So I was already sketching stuff for, I believe I settled on 150 years into the future in the same sector of space. And I was sketching those ideas up in my head before we had the talk. And then we had the talk and we came up with the idea of, okay, well, what about we are, we wanted to have sort of like a quest type situation. And we decided that was the search for a new home planet. And, then we ended up deciding that, maybe it's a different area of space. And now we're there. And I had the joy of creating stuff whole cloth next to the area that we had already established in the year-long campaign. It is... It's a good way to play. I enjoy both. Like I said, I was getting ready to do another round in the same area.
Yeah,
and I still want to do that as well because I do enjoy. I don't have the difficulty of comparing it to my previous efforts, thankfully, and it's almost just a joy for me, I suppose, in taking what I had made and then. We spent a year of the players having an impact in this area that I had created with Crawford's tools and my own sensibilities and what I wanted to do. And then everyone bounced around for a year. We made some really big waves in the setting of the game. And I find that to be super inspiring, taking the game, like the end state of the previous campaign, and then saying, what is the logical sort of path forward 150 years from here, and I find that to be so cool. And that's one of the things that I find so aspirational in this like long running campaign setting is that you could build a legacy of previous campaigns and then point out, okay, so now we're 600 years later and there's all these things that have their roots in something that we did like 6 campaigns previous
and generated by players that might not even be in the game right now. Like that's interesting. Like their legacy continues on.
I find it to be like
it's cool,
enticing. It sounds romantic to me, and I guess we'll get there slowly because the problem here is that I enjoy the idea. I enjoy Stars Without Number. We tend to play long games of it when we do.
Yeah.
But the problem for me when it comes to achieving that sort of wallpaper map is that I enjoy a lot of games. And it's not Stars Without Number revised all day, every day. It's a mixture of all kinds of games that I have had on my shelf for years, and the stuff that comes out because I am quite voracious when it comes to getting new RPG stuff to read and ponder about and sort of dissect for like what makes them tick, what's the cool thing in this particular design that someone made and sold for $15 in a Kickstarter zine. Like I enjoy that stuff a lot. So I suppose like it's a cool dream for me, but I don't think I'll ever actually get there. I'll get maybe like a moderate size sort of balloon legacy game world eventually, but it won't be too large just because I like to play a lot of games.
Yeah, I mean,
You like variety.
I think as well. I mean, for me personally, I mean, you know, I love like my OSR, like D&D clones and stuff like that. For me personally, I could run like old D&D like every game until like Doomsday, and I would be fine with that. But by the same token, I also recognise that my players might like to try some other games, and I've got other games, so occasionally I like to sort of change it up a bit or try something different. We did a bit of Vampire. We've done some various other stuff over the years. So even though for me, I'm like, do you know what? Yeah, I could quite happily just go, oh, I'm going to get old school essentials or whatever. And every game I run from now until the day I die is going to be old school essentials. I'd be fine with that. But by the same token, I can appreciate my players wanting a bit of variety and wanting to try out new stuff. And I know we've done like Tremulous one-shots and various other one-shots. And it is nice every now and again just to go, oh, we're gonna change it up. We're going to try something different. But to come back to talking about sort of like what I like about new games, I also find for myself that I'm more willing to try out like new or different stuff with a new game. And the example I'll use of that is my current game that I'm running, the Revolvers and Katanas game, where we started off, we ran the first couple of sessions using Worlds Without Number. Then we switched to Easy D6, and that's no shade on Worlds Without Number. Again, written by Kevin Crawford. It's a great system, but for myself, I made a few errors when we were talking about that, where there's basically like two styles of play. One is like your standard sort of 0 to hero D&D sort of experience, and the other is like they have like alternate like sort of like heroic classes, where it's a little bit more sort of like your 5th edition sort of high-powered stuff. And we sort of went for that, and being keen to like try something new and to give the players what they want, I sort of went for that without thinking like, all right, okay, I'm only just sort of getting into this like rule system. Is adding all this extra stuff on top as like my first time running it, is that really the way to go? And in retrospect, it probably wasn't, because I struggled with it as the GM.
Yeah, it brings more moving parts, right? Which like that's always a consideration.
Yeah, and I mean, like I say again, no shade on the rules. I think it's a great system, and I think if I'd have ran a couple of games with like the standard rules, and then I probably will attempt to run it again using the standard rules at some point in the future. But I think I basically tried to like run before I could walk, because like the players, I looked at the heroic classes and I was like, oh yeah, man, this looks cool. There's all this like cool stuff you can do with your characters. And I didn't stop to think like, but yeah, we've got to know all the rules for that. We've got to like incorporate all that into the game.
Yeah,
and
this get is familiar with it.
Yeah, and this is the first time I've been running for it. So it wasn't a massive problem during the sessions, but for me, I found like the leveling up and having to like cross-check all the different classes and stuff like that a bit of a nightmare for me, because I'd not had the time to fully digest the rules. I was like, right, I know some of it because it uses the same system as Stars Without Number, which I've played a few games that Johannes has run, but I've not actually run them myself. And as we know, running a game can be quite different from playing in a game. So I made the decision, like, right, I'm gonna switch over to Easy D6, which is a far simpler system. And I'm sure that we've been in like a session or two with that so far, and I'm sure that's going to bring its like own challenges as a game system. But for me, because it's a more sort of streamlined, sort of easy to digest system, I can just concentrate on like enjoying the game and making the game cool without stressing about the fact I've not fully digested the rule system yet. And I think if I'd have been running a sort of second season of an existing campaign, I don't think I'd have been willing to as much to take the risk of going, oh, I'll try an entirely new like game system, or I'll try these rules, or I'll switch these rules in, or whatever, because I'd have wanted to keep it sort of very much as it was originally. And obviously you could say like, oh, I'll run the first session using D&D, I'm going to run the second season doing Worlds Without Number or whatever. But for me, I think I'd have been less willing to take that risk than with a new game where I'm like, oh, let's try this set of rules for like a few sessions. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. We're still at the start of the game. We can easily like switch it around and we can still carry on with the game.
Matthew, did you have?
I had a point. Yeah, actually, he would. I suppose to summarise what John is saying there, is the idea that a school of thought of you learn one system really well, and then you can just focus on the campaign of running the game, creating the story, creating the characters. You don't have to absorb all these new mechanics.
Well, I think as well, and I'm sorry to be a bit like maudlin like so early in the conversation as well, I think inevitably I see Johannes like reach for the mics and say that.
Yeah, it's like us being like morose and not all peppy. Oh,
yeah, Cal surprise. But
yeah, big surprise there.
Remember, laugh. I forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, I think we've all accepted that. So like we're not in our sort of like our teenage years anymore when you've got limitless time to spend like doing your game prep and stuff like. So we've all got jobs, we've all got responsibilities, we've all got other stuff we have to do, and you only actually have so much prep time. And I mean, you have often joke like however much time we've had, it's not enough. But for me, I find now like, and again, I've gone on like ad nauseum about like my memory issues, but for me, it now takes me a lot longer to like read a rule system and to absorb it to the point where I feel comfortable of going, yeah, I can run that.
I'm ready. Yeah.
And that's down to like my deteriorating memory, also due to the fact I've got less time. I can't just now go, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to sit down for like 2 days. I'm going to like read through all of these books until I've like memorized them, just because I haven't got that sort of time.
And you get to the point where I've read someone do this simpler in a different game. You see someone overcomplicate something, and you think, well, I could do that a lot easier. Yeah.
And to me, like the sort of holy grail now at this point in my life is I want a system that's going to be easy enough for me to pick up, and it's going to support the sort of game we're after. So the reason I transitioned into Easy D6 was because it's very sort of heroic, it's very free flowing, and that was the sort of style of game we wanted. But it's a lot simpler. So for me, I hate more than anything having to like stop a game and be like, right, I'm gonna have to look this up. And it's weird because like I don't mind it if it happens in anyone else's game. If I'm playing in a game and someone's like, I've got to look up a rule, I'm like, sound, that's fine. But I personally don't like having to do it myself. And because I like these sort of, in inverted commas, open world games where you can do anything, if I was doing like a more scripted sort of quest, for argument's sake, I could go like, right, okay, there's 3 combat encounters here, so I need to make sure I know the combat rules. There's a pit trap here, so I need to know how much damage they take from falling. Whereas when people are sort of wandering around and they're doing their own thing, you need to have a far broader knowledge of the system. And I've leaned quite heavily on Johannes in previous games, where it's like Kevin Crawford games or games that we've both played, where Johannes is very kind, like when I've been leading up to something, by the time I get to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to check this, Johannes is like, oh, it's on page 65 and like, here's the rules. And it's great to have players that are willing to do that, and I'm always happy to sort of like use that resource, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But I generally prefer systems where I know them well enough that like that is minimal, and there will be points where I have to look up rules, but I like to minimise that.
You can navigate them quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because it's comfortable, right?
Yeah, of
Like
course.
you feel comfortable in, understanding the moving bits that you're putting forward. And I will say, like I always am a little bit reticent, being like, John, John, I can see you struggling, and then I jump in with whatever it is. It always feels a little bit like I'm intruding somehow.
No,
which
by all means, go ahead.
you've said multiple times like it's okay and it's actually pretty cool if you can just shoot it off instead of having to dig it out. But still, like there's something in me that just like it feels like I'm intruding on something. It's even if like it's not about the DM authority, because that's never been the thing in in the sort of circles that we've been gaming in. Like that's never been an issue of like authority as far as that goes, talking about the games that we played. But for some reason there's a little bit of a sort of wince to me when I reach for the mic. It's like actually it goes like this.
Yeah, and I entirely understand that, because I feel very much the same when I've sort of done stuff like that, and especially if you happen to know the system a bit better than the GM. And I think it's because certainly for me, we've all heard like the horror stories of like rules lawyers, and like every time someone like says that the GM says something, they're like, well, actually, if you look at page 35, paragraph 3, you'll find that this. We've all heard those sort of like horror stories.
I have this thing on my sheet that basically says I can do what I want because it wasn't edited in a way that clarified the rule well enough. So now I think I can interpret it any way I want.
Yeah, and I think despite the fact that like if a player, I know as a GM, like if like yourself, Johannes, or another player like offers a like helpful suggestion, or like, oh, it's on this page of the PDF or whatever. I'm fine with that, because I know it's not them sort of trying to take GM authority or sort of rules law or anything. They're just trying to help. But I know for myself, when I suggest stuff, I'm always like, oh, I kind of don't want to be that guy who's constantly like sort of like rustling the pages of the rule book, and I'll be, well, actually, if you check this. So I do think it's a weird thing.
Yep, and for me, like it's a reflex almost, and that is 1000% because I care about the systems that we use. Because that's something I find very interesting in this hobby, just in general, like system design, the design of different games. That's part of why I'm so attracted to new stuff that comes out, because I want to see new and interesting designs, and that's entertaining for me. And when we play these games, my reflex is like, oh, I can help the design move into a way that it's intended to, because I remember this thing that we're talking about. So here's the info. But like that is, trying to be helpful, but feeling sort of awkward about it, I guess, because I do very much recognize that like a strong interest in system and game design is not everyone's cup of tea. And I never want to push that on people who have not signed up to play in a Burning Wheel game with me. But if you have, here's the systems, my dude. They coming.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, like it comes from and this is just sort of like how the sort of idea I've formed as I've been role playing over the years. For me, I always expect to go into a game, especially if it's a game I've not played, I always expect the GM to like know the system better than anybody else. So for me, and I fully acknowledge this is just like pressure you put on yourself. If I go into a game and I'm like, oh, I probably don't know this as well as my players, no shade on the players, because like they might have run like 6 billion campaigns of this game, and I'm running my first one, so obviously they know it better than me. But I always feel slightly awkward, because I'm like, oh, as the GM, I should have done the background reading on this. I should have like picked this up by now. So... But, and like you say, again, no shade on the players. Everyone's got different levels of experience. But I always feel that sort of slight sort of like awkwardness. And like I say, I love it when players come in and they're able to help out. They're able to offer suggestions. We're able to like, as far as I'm concerned, that's like players using their knowledge of the rules in the right way, rather than the sort of rules lawyer horror stories we hear. The players going like, oh, we're just sort of suggesting stuff to help move the game along and make it better. And as you say, Johannes, work as it intended. That's great. I always feel slightly awkward as a GM though if I feel like I've not done enough work to know the system well enough to like run it. You know what I mean? And that sounds a bit weird. It sounds weird to me now saying it, but
one of my joys, sorry, I didn't mean to interject there, John. Yeah, is one of my joys is to play in a game that I really like. People who don't understand it at all, and like to try and showcase the game to them, be like, look, like you may not know the rules, but that's cool. Let me just consider doing it like this because this game supports you in this way, and like trying to. I in a recent example, I played in a D&D game with newish players, and the GM asked me to come in as a kind of not like a second GM, but like someone who could help him, like teach them some of the rules and show them how the game works. So I played a character, which was against D&D. I played a divination wizard, and my entire role in that game was just to make them look good. Like all I wanted to do was like, look at all these cool things that you can do. Look at how the game parts of the game can interact with each other. And I turn them into a creature to show them that you can do that. Like I would change their dice rolls to show them the difference between like how rolling high is really useful. Rolling low and not so good in that game, and like to try and teach them, but do it in universe, as it were, like show them how the game can actually work.
Yeah, and I mean, I sort of share Johannes's view. Like, if you're gonna use a particular system, that system probably works in a particular way that was intended by the designer. Obviously, you can bring in house rules and stuff like that, but if you pick a game and it's designed to run in a certain way, you're probably best to aim your game to like take advantage of that. And we've talked about sort of loads of times about how like old D&D is by no means like the best rule system, and I'm under no delusions that it is. For me though, it's a rule system I know and that I feel comfortable enough with that, like, even if I didn't have most of my D&D books now, if I had like just one of my old school essentials core book, I could pick that up. We could gen characters and I could run it, and I would barely need to look at the rulebook because I've run that many games of it. I know it well. Whereas to me, I've got like a lot of other games at the minute that I'd love to run. Obviously, there's always the time thing, there's only so many games you can run. But I've got games like Vesson, which I've got a few books for that. I've got like the Mythic Britain one and like the Seasons of Mystery Adventures books and stuff like that. And I would love to run that game. But for me, even setting aside the fact of like, have I got time to run this game? Let's say my game had come to an end and I'm looking for a new campaign. I'd look at that and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'd really like to run that. But then I have to think, like, have I got enough time to sit down and absorb the system in time to then start running a game of it, feeling comfortable enough with that system to be able to run it? And I think with Vesson I probably could, because it's not a very complicated system. And I have no problem with complicated system. We've talked about how much myself and Johannes and you, Matthew, enjoyed the Burning Wheel game. And
baby!
And that's quite a sort of like dense sort of system. Like it's got a rule for like everything. But
and then some.
Yeah, and I've thoroughly enjoyed playing that. Would I feel comfortable in running it? Shit, no, I wouldn't feel comfortable in running it. But again, even with that, I think if I ran a Burning Wheel game, they've made the wise thing there where they do what they refer to as like spokes of the wheel, I believe, where they're like, here's the core system, and then you can use all this optional stuff like the fight system and like the debating system and stuff like that. You can bolt that on or not as you see fit. And a lot of that stuff doesn't come into play very often. So I think in that situation, I'd be all right with it, because I can like, right, I'll just master the core system, and then, okay, if I know we're probably going into like a big climactic fight in the session, or there's going to be a big like parliamentary debate or whatever, I just need to read up on that little bit, and it's all like isolated little modules that all sort of like fit together. So I think I'd be all right with that, but it probably wouldn't be the first game I'd reach for. And that's it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation about this aspect of gaming, and we'll be continuing that in future episodes. If you've enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff that people always ask you to do in videos and podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch, maybe leave your comments and become part of the conversation yourself, you can get in touch in a number of different ways. You can leave us a voicemail message using SpeakPipe or Anchor. There'll be links in the description of the podcast version of the episode. You can drop a comment in the YouTube version, or you can email us at rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, Take care, stay safe, and whenever you're playing, have fun.